Okay, so back here, gonna do our summer movie camp. We're gonna start off with a little bit of going to the theater. So we're gonna go to see Toy Story 5. Yes, the fifth installment. And of course, uh, I've been seeing Toy Story since 1995, ever since it first came out. So we're gonna go in, gonna check it out, and I'll come back with a little something afterwards. Uh, it is movie related, so yeah. So let's check out Toy Story 5. Okay, so Toy Story 5. Yes, there are 5 of these movies now. And I was just kind of looking through the IMDb page. This is a kind of a monumental one. I thought Toy Story 4 was rated PG, but apparently it's not. Toy Story 5 is the first one to be rated PG. Now, don't worry, parents. There's nothing really in this film that is going to get you twisted up and say, "Oh my gosh, this is in there." The only thing that's in there is there's a little bit of potty humor, but it's pretty much a family flick, and it's the Toy Story films have always dealt with the landmarks of what goes through in the lifespan of a toy. I myself have my own share of toys, have my favorite toys. I still have my teddy bear. I don't sleep with it or anything like that. I'm not doing anything weird, but I do have it. I still have my Tonka trucks, which almost went away to a rummage sale, but I'm planning to eventually, at some point in time, restore those actually. But Toy Story 5, this one finds itself in 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 a modern threat of what goes through what's going through with toys now. And so the film opens up with Buzz, what we think is the Buzz Lightyear, waking up on a beach. And we come to find that it's a truckload of highly advanced, or like the new edition of Buzz Lightyear, that had been, where a shipping crate full of these toys had been lost during shipment. And so they all become awake and they find, hey, we need to get to land. We need to find Star Command. So they actually think that they are the Buzz Lightyear. But then it gets to Bonnie. And Bonnie is, at this time, she's 8 years old, but she's a bit of a lonely girl. She's a lonely child. She doesn't have very many friends, and there's a new family that has moved in across the street, and they are, and the toys are wondering, when is she going to ask them to come over and play with her? And of course Bonnie's very shy. And Mom and Dad think it's best, while her friends are doing this, she's still playing with toys, but her friends, her classmates, are all using this one particular toy. So Mom and Dad place an order, it arrives, da 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 da, we are introduced to Lily Pad, the personal computer, which has become, even to adults, and the film shows that we're addicted to these screens. That's kind of the moral of the story, is that we've allowed technology to kind of kill imagination a little bit. We are all addicted to a screen, whether that is a computer screen or a tablet or whatever, a phone. And of course that's kind of the warning that this movie is giving, is that we've got a problem, and we can't let these things kill good old-fashioned imagination and relationships. Because that's another thing that goes on, is that it shows that technology can be a blessing and it can be a curse. That it can ruin relationships, but also it can bring people together at the same time. It's just a matter of, you got to find that right friend to become friends with, is what the film is saying. Is that not all people that you're going to meet with technology is going to be your friend. As a matter of fact, they even bully you, and that happens in a one key sequence of this film, where Bonnie is bullied, and she's bullied by people who she thinks is her friend. But the film does have that sweetness to it. And another interesting thing was that this was mostly Jesse's story. This wasn't Woody takes kind of a back seat, while the other 4 films have been more of Woody's story. This one is more of a Jesse story. And how, because we know in Toy Story 2 how Jesse was abandoned by Emily. And this film debunks a fan theory which fans have had about Toy Story. It completely debunks what fans were saying. The fans were saying that Emily was Andy's mom. That Jesse belonged to Andy's mom. This debunks that. Because there's a point in the film where Jessie goes back to her first owner's house, which is occupied by a new family, and finds that Emily grew up, had a daughter. Not a boy, a daughter. So thus, can't be Andy's mom. Sorry to spoil that for the theories that Emily was Andy's mom. No, it is not. But we also meet some new characters. We meet a character by the name of Smarty Pants, voiced by Conan O'Brien. And I'm not going to spoil this much, but he is another device. He's another digital device, but not Bonnie's. And we also have Greta Lee as the voice of Lilypad. And at first, this is another thing with the Toy Story franchises. Who you think is the villain in the film is really not the villain. They're more like the tragic hero. There's only been, like, Toy Story 3 and Toy Story 1, there have been true villains. Lotso in Toy Story 3, but he had a tragic past, so he was kind of the tragic villain. And in Toy Story 1, of course, it was Sid. But the rest of the films, the villain, who you think is the villain, kind of has some redemption. Well, I guess in Toy Story 2 you had Stinky Pete, but from then on you pretty much have the villains have a redemption to them. So like, so who you think is the villain ends up being kind of a good person, just with once they understand something and have that aha moment, like, you know, I belong, and so that's the thing. Go see the movie and you'll find out, you know, what happens to the villain. And of course, it's all good. It's all good in the end. So no one gets hurt and everyone lives happy. And according to IMDb, there is already talk of Toy Story 6. See, this was a sweet movie, and it's a good movie. The screening I went to, there was a lot of kids there. And I noticed there was a lot of people who were my age or so, because we grew up with this movie franchise. It's kind of taken on that vernacular, that Star Wars has, that it's been handed down to generation, and same with Toy Story, is that it's now the kids who saw the originals back in the mid to late mid 90s to the 2000s, they're now taking their children to see Toy Story, and they're saying how they love it. And I'm pretty sure I sat next to a family with a child that was their first time being in a movie theater, because the child was getting a little antsy and a little fussy, but the rest of the family that they were with, they seemed to enjoy the movie with everybody else, and they were laughing at the certain parts. And there's the whole platoon with Buzz Lightyears. At first, when you see them, you don't know what's going to become of them. Are they going to be like troublesome? But no. Just check the movie out to see for yourself. But also, the movie at the same time is a warning about digital screens. And there's a lesson to be learned there, is that, you know, we shouldn't let these things, you know, there is times when you just need to close them up, take a break. You know, just close them up, take a break, because these things should not dictate, you know, our lives, our real relationships with people, our imagination. And so that's what the film is saying, is that, you know, sometimes you need to turn it off and just take a break. You know, because that's why we now have people with such high anxiety numbers and through the roof, and, you know, we're highly emotional people now, because we are addicted to what's on a tablet or a phone now. You know, where our social status is according to our social media pages, and the president's doing this, or this person's doing that, and this celebrity said this, and yeah. And I've been saying this for quite some time. You know, every single screen I have, including my iPad, and as you can see, I can close this up and I'm taking my eyes off of the screen. But also, this is my TV. It has a little button on the top here called the power button, which means I can turn it off. Take a break. You know, shut that stuff off. These things can be a portal to imagination and creativity, yes, and art, but when it becomes the most important thing in your life, that's when you know you need to turn it off. Turn it off. Go outside. Just be careful in this heat. Because here in Indiana, it is around 100 degrees outside. So that being said, speaking of things that I had to say goodbye to. Just like in the film depicts that toys go through different stages, just like us people go through different stages. Had to say goodbye to something this week. It had been closed for some time, but the building itself has to come down. So let's take a look. Okay, this is what I'm wanting to show. This is what's left of the Muncie Mall 3 movie theater. Now, I remember coming to this place when I was a kid, watching a few movies there. Of course, some cars are passing by. And that's what's left. Eventually, this whole mall is going to be demolished because of the economy and things like that. But when I was coming here, Kdogs Theaters was managing this theater. A little bit of history behind it is that it opened in 1975 under the United Artists Theaters brand, and then in 1990, in the early 1990s, Goodrich Quality Theaters took it over and ran it from early 90s. That's about all I know there. And then Kdogs ran it till about 99, 2000, and then it became a dollar theater until like 2003, 2004. But it's coming down, and that's what's left of it. The first film I ever saw here was Operation Dumbo Drop with Ray Liotta and Danny Glover, which was a Disney release. And the last film I saw was also a Disney release. It was The Straight Story with Richard Farnsworth, directed by David Lynch. And the story behind that was, I've shared this once before, but my dad, there used to be an entrance about where that crane is going into the mall theater entrance, where you didn't have to go through the mall. Of course, when you go to the last showing of the evening, they tell you that you cannot exit through the mall. There's warnings everywhere. Or there was warnings everywhere, excuse me, and yeah, and so you had to enter and exit through that theater entrance. And my dad didn't do that. We ended up having to walk around this mall. Now, luckily, this is not a huge mall. It was pretty good in size, but it was not one of the larger malls. Thankfully, it was not one of the largest malls in the state. But eventually, we had to walk around it as soon as we got out. And then, but eventually, this mall will be completely demolished because of economic times. So, yeah, all this is going to be coming down. They lost their anchor stores right around COVID. That was when JCPenney's pulled out, and so yeah, just a sad sign of changing times in the economy. It's all coming down. Okay, so in the middle of the summer movie camp, there, occasionally you see something that's on TV that you might want to watch. So one night I was at my parents' house, and this one popped on TV, and thought we'd take a look at this one. And so it's one that me and my dad, we've always kind of enjoyed watching, and it's one that holds my dad's attention definitely, because he remembers when the actual event happened. So, but we're going to take a look at the film that was the adaptation from 1995, I believe. Yes, so from 1995, it is the Ron Howard film starring Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton, Gary Sinise, and Ed Harris. It is Apollo 13. Yeah. Managed to see this one on the 4th of July. We turned on BBC America, and they happened to be playing this, and it was the way that they were celebrating America's 250th as being somewhat patriotical and playing some, because it does have to do with American history and what was going on with the Apollo missions, and this one was a unique case, and so because the film opens up with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon. So yeah, this is from Universal Pictures and Imagine Entertainment in 1995. Strap in, because Houston, we have a problem. Here's Apollo 13. Okay, well, Apollo 13, the film came out in 1995, and it was depicting what was going on in the year 1970 in the middle of the Apollo missions that was going on in the late 60s, early 70s, and of course it was all about how we had to beat the Russians to the moon. Well, that was Apollo 11, and we did beat the Russians to the moon. Some people believe that no, it was filmed on a soundstage in Los Angeles, and supposedly Stanley Kubrick was the director. Believe that as you will. Just like we have people that believe in some strange things, but I'm just going by what is presented in the film here. So the film opens up, Jim Lovell, we meet Jim Lovell and his family. They're over at the Lovell's house. They're throwing this big party because it's a big celebration that they're all working for NASA and that there is a man landing on the moon. Okay, and so Lovell is again working for NASA. We see him giving tours to the facilities and things like that, and then it's announced that because the original lead of the Apollo 13 mission was going to be Alan Shepard, and something happened along the line. I think he came down with a case of the flu or something like that, and was not able to serve on Apollo 13. So he's replaced by Jim Lovell, and it's established that Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert are going to be the three men in the oh no, I'm sorry, Jack Swigert replaces Ken Mattingly. Okay, Jim Lovell's played by Tom Hanks here. Bill Paxton plays Fred Hayes, and Gary Sinise plays plays Ken. Yeah, I had to think of the guy's name. And then Kevin Bacon plays Jack. And so, and it's discovered that 2 of the 3 astronauts had been exposed to the measles and then had the measles, except for one, and that is Ken Mattingly, Gary Sinise's character. So he is instructed by the flight surgeon that he is grounded. He will not be serving on Apollo 13. He's to be replaced by Jack, Kevin Bacon. And of course we meet all 3 of these guys. We get into a little bit of their daily lives, and of course when they go up, it's by this time the people didn't really care. It almost became routine really quickly that that going to the moon was no longer a big deal, and so they were just whatever. And because there's one instance where the mission goes up, and they're broadcasting on live television that they're going to have, they're on their way to the moon. But the network television cancels them. They cancel the program just like it was another program, and replaces them with baseball. but until the incident happens, which was a electrical failure in the oxygen, when they stir the oxygen tanks, it causes part of the ship to be destroyed, and or it cripples the ship, and they have to use the lunar excursion module to kind of navigate themselves in outer space. And that's difficult to steer. And they have to turn everything off and basically run everything under 20 amps. And what Ron Howard did so well in this film is that he showed multiple different angles. He showed the multiple different angles, how this is affecting everybody involved, how it's affecting the families, especially Lovell's family, how it's affecting Mission Control, and how it's affecting the guys that are stuck in space. And it intercuts he found a way to intercut it with his editors to, go back and forth, because it's a matter of time. And they only have so much oxygen. Matter of fact, that does run out at some point in time, because they have to shut everything down, and so it becomes a problem with their carbon dioxide. And there's too much carbon dioxide in the cabin, and so they have to come up with the stuff to create man-made filters, and figure out how to run everything, get back home before everything just collapses, and basically run it on fumes, getting it back home. And it just seems like what they depict in the film is just one thing after another. Like it's bombarded with every single problem after the main incident. It just seems like there's something else that's coming into the way of them getting back home. But they're able to figure it out, come together, figure it out, and get back home. And that's what Ron Howard in this film, and with William Broyles Jr., what they managed to, and plus his editors, and just figure out how to tell this story. And every time I watch it, it's just like, you're holding on tightly to what's going to happen. When are they going to make it? Are they going to come out of this alive? And so it's every time for the past 31 years of watching Apollo 13, it still gets me. And how it was filmed is unique in its way, because in order to achieve the zero gravity, that was in an airplane that they had to film forming the zero gravity, and they had to create that illusion of, like say, guys doing somersaults in the middle of the air, and just they built the set up in this airplane, this little tight compartment, got the cameras in, and had to show that happening. The rest of the time it had to be done on a sound stage. And they had to kind of pantomime floating in space. So they kind of had to like sit in a chair. The camera shot would be tight on them, like show from here up. They couldn't show anything below the waist, and they're kind of doing this bit, like just kind of moving around, and they're careful not to show what's below them because they're actually sitting down in a seat. And the actors had to mime like they're in weightlessness and so on and so forth. And of course, part of this was achieved by visual effects. The visual effects here was completed by the visual effects house Digital Domain. It's the first time, I believe, that Ron Howard collaborated with them, because previously I think the last visual effects picture I think he did was, before that was Backdraft, and that was ILM. So this time he chose to go with Digital Domain, and would collaborate with Digital Domain till present day, I think. I think he's, yeah, but once he's like, the filmmakers are kind of this way, like once they find the people that they like to work with, they're going to continue to work with them, and because it's regardless if he went back to ILM or if he went to Digital Domain or whoever, the main part is to tell the story. And of course, Digital Domain did the most iconic shot is the liftoff and the launch of the shuttle, and of course everything that's outer space. So they did the job and helped contribute to tell the story of what they were trying to do. This is, it's definitely a story of triumph, because as me and my dad were watching this on television a couple weeks ago, a little while ago, and we were watching it, and he said, I forgot this ever happened until this movie came out. And he said, then it brought back the memories of just sitting there watching the TV and watching for that ship to come, just break through radio silence. And I asked him, I said, was it like that in the film? Because, a lot of times Hollywood takes creative liberty and things, and like they over-exaggerate things to make it seem bigger than what it really was. And he said, well, it was minutes. It was minutes when they had to go radio silent. And then when you heard, Houston, this is Odyssey, it's good to see you again, boom. That's when you went, just like, and he said it was pretty accurate to what's depicted in the film. And of course, the nation was watching for these men to safely return home. And of course, this movie's a classic. It's been remastered several times. There's been a couple of IMAX releases. Matter of fact, this film was one of the first Hollywood movies to be remastered for IMAX. In, I believe it was 2003, 2004, they did an IMAX version of Apollo 13, and they had to, for that version, they had to cut down the film to just shy of 100 minutes. The running time for the original theatrical version was 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I think it was either last year or earlier this spring, they did a 30th anniversary re-release to IMAX again, but they were able to play the whole 2 hour and 20 minute version this time around. But for the first time it played in IMAX, they had to cut it down to around 90 minutes because it was just because the length of the film was too long, and they could not hold, the film systems could not tolerate it. Now you have Christopher Nolan releasing The Odyssey, which runs, I believe, at a 2 hour and 45 minute length. his previous film Oppenheimer ran exactly at 3 hours. So, and the Odyssey is shot entirely in IMAX. So, but yeah, Apollo 13. It's become a classic film. Do check it out. It is available. It's available Blu-ray, Ultra 4K HD, and of course check your favorite streaming services. It's widely available. So yeah, Apollo 13. So with that, we'll move right on to the next one. It's kind of interesting how the summer has turned out to be. You know, I never planned on this to actually, you know, be kind of a summer that is kind of forgettable. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what to make of what the movie slate looks at the theater. You know, but however, there has been a few hits. One is which is a massive hit right now, and surprisingly, and it's kind of rethinking the way movies are being, I don't want to say distributed, but the way they're getting made, because, you know, the whole time we've been talking about this whole woke DEI thing, and yet Christopher Nolan has had a huge success this summer so far with The Odyssey, and it's been completely, as what some critics would say, woke DEI of, you know, that's been woke DEI all to shreds, but people are kind of ignoring it and going anyway. But I'm kind of holding off on The Odyssey, so I'm going to give it a fair shake. And because what I've read is that we're kind of taking that those criticisms to heart, and maybe not looking at the broader picture of maybe that those were the best actors for the choices to play those parts. And so that's another rant for another time. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep this, I call it the summer movie camp, because it's going to be the movies that I'm talking about this summer. Not necessarily summer themed movies, because there's a ton of those. You know, there's been a ton of blockbusters and things like that. And but we need to talk about more movie-related stuff, not necessarily what's playing at the theater, even though that's all part of the whole gig. But there was one thing so far this summer I was able to take part in, and I kind of look forward to it. And luckily I did have some funds come in due to work picking up, you know, and some overtime hours, get a little bit of extra money. But the Criterion Collection 50% off sale at Barnes & Noble had taken place this summer. And there are many people who are on the internet. They are talking, they go on and they talk about their hauls. And so I thought, part of the movie camp is we're going to talk about my haul, what I managed to pick up. And there was some titles here I was glad that Criterion was able to pick up and put a part of the collection. That way I could see them and maybe have a decent edition of. So, and one of the films we will be showing tonight, so hold on to your horses. So let's get into that. So, here's the stack of titles that I managed to pick up. And one of these was not a part of the sale, but a find nonetheless. So I will get into that very shortly. So first up, we have Designed for Living, a Ernest Lubitsch film from 1933. So yeah, that was one. This is a Blu-ray. Spine, $5.92. Yeah, so yeah, Designed for Living. Spine number 1308. We have Lawrence Kasdan's Body Heat. starring the late William Hurt and Kathleen Turner. Released back in 1981. Directed by Lawrence Kasdan, who is fresh off of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So yeah. And this kind of started, I think it kind of started what was then called the neo-noir genre, that kind of, they were trying to do their own take on film, like a more modern take of film noir in the 1980s. So yeah, there's Body Heat. This is one I was glad that Criterion picked this up and put out a edition of this. This is the Ultra 4K HD version of Lenny. Spine number 1312. Directed by Bob Fosse, starring Dustin Hoffman. And I got a story about this. A couple years ago, I was laid up in the hospital with appendicitis. For those of you that follow my videos, and a couple years ago you might remember that, and I was staying at home for 2 weeks and watching nothing but movies. Well, they happened to have in the hospital cable TV, and part of the channels was Turner Classic Movies. And so they managed to have, that night, managed to play Lenny. And I didn't watch it because I ended up turning the channel because I thought it was kind of inappropriate at the time, because being in a hospital, I felt that somebody would walk in, because in the first 5 minutes of this movie, there is a particular scene of a certain dancer played by, but anyway, I'm not going to say the actress's name, but there's a certain, when the actress who plays the female lead in this film comes on screen, she's doing a particular style of dancing, what I thought maybe I shouldn't be looking at this point in time. So I managed to get the Ultra 4K HD Blu-ray version, so you can look at it now. But at the time, it was kind of like I'm kind of in a public place, and yeah. So next up is a Blu-ray of the Coen Brothers 2001 film The Man Who Wasn't There, starring Billy Bob Thornton, with spine number 1301. Yeah, I just managed to get the Blu-ray version. I didn't get the Ultra 4K version, which I'm okay. It's same content, just at 1080p resolution. And next up, from 1976, it is John Cassavetes and Peter Falk and Mikey and Nicky, film directed by Elaine May. Yeah, spine number 957. So I probably shouldn't show the spine that much because of this light, but I'm trying to avoid the glare. But yeah, there's Mikey and Nicky. And this is one another one I was looking forward to, that because I heard so much about, because I was listening to a podcast with Quentin Tarantino, and he was talking about this, and he said it's not his particular favorite of this type of movie, but he said it is a darn good one. It is Lee Marvin and John Boorman's Point Blank from 1967. Spine number 1306, and this of course is the Ultra 4K HD version. So yeah, it comes with both the Blu-ray and the Ultra 4K HD Blu-ray. Next up is the Blu-ray. Now some of these titles, they don't always come out with the Ultra 4K HD version. They just come out with just a Blu-ray version, which is okay. But here is a film from 1975. It is, oh gosh, Michael Schultz's film, Cooley High, from 1976. A very influential film, very groundbreaking film for the time, because there weren't too many African-American filmmakers doing this sort of thing at the time. And this was originally a AIP film. So yeah, so there's Cooley High. Next up, another film by Ernest Lubitsch. It is on Blu-ray. It is from 1932. It is Trouble in Paradise. Spine number 170. So yeah, and this one, I think what kind of sold me on this one is that it's one of the films restored by the Film Foundation. And there's a tie-in here to the next film about the Film Foundation and who its founder is. So it's one of its key members last year turned out a film that went theatrically, but home video distribution was exclusive to Apple TV because Apple produced this film, but good old Marty Scorsese, leave it up to him and his partnership with Criterion, he's managed to get The Irishman, which was the film that he produced with Netflix, and he got The Irishman to come to Blu-ray through Criterion, as well as his film here. Actually, I said it was last year, but it's 2023. Spine number 1302. It is Killers of the Flower Moon. Yeah, this went straight to Apple TV once it was done with its theatrical run. And unfortunately for us physical media people, we weren't able to see it unless you have Apple TV a subscription. So yeah, there it is. Killers of the Flower Moon. This is the Ultra 4K HD version. So and this film, I did not get a part of the sale. I actually went across the street from when I did go one time to one of the times I went to the Barnes & Noble. I went across the street to Half-Priced Books, and somebody, whoever they were, they decided to trade in a bunch of stuff that was never opened, and it was never opened, and there was several Criterions, there were several Kino Lorber titles that were just unopened. And this one in particular, I've seen it countless times in many Barnes & Noble stores, and I've seen it online, and over the ever since I started collecting Criterions, this is a title that keeps popping up because it was a key film in the French New Wave, and it is the Ultra 4K HD version of Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless. Now, again, was not part of the Criterion sale. I mean, it was if you went to Barnes & Noble, it was a part of the sale, but I did not buy this as a part of the sale. I went to Half-Price Books and bought this. Never opened. $25.99, and with if you just went to, that's only 99 cents more if I had bought it at Barnes & Noble. So you're within playing distance there, but it was not on sale. Just me to walk in and buy this. Somebody had just turned this in unopened, so I don't know what the story was there. And you know, Criterions are not cheap. And of course, Books A Million, and why am I saying Books A Million? Books A Million no longer sells stuff like this, but Half Price Books, they sold it straight out $25.99, and so it's reasonably priced. You know, for usually their used DVDs, you're talking, you know, anywhere from $3.99 to $6.99, depending on what it is. But this was an Ultra 4K HD, $25.99, just straight up. So, score. Now, this was a part of the sale, and this one is a movie I was kind of excited when, another one that that was excited for me to when Criterion announced that this was coming, because I had heard so much about this film. It's a classic Scorsese film. Very, very popular film at the time. It spun off a TV sitcom. As a matter of fact, I think many of the cast, many of the supporting cast who were in this film turned up in the TV show, I think. I need to do a little bit of research, but once we see the film. It is from 1974, directed by Martin Scorsese, and it is Ellen Burstyn, Chris Christopherson in the classic Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Of course, this is the Ultra 4K edition. Spine number 1318. And so this is going to be the next feature we're going to talk about. So, I have never seen this movie, but I've heard so much about it. It spun off a very popular sitcom in the 70s just called Alice. And so, yeah. So let's don the lights, have a seat, kick off your shoes, relax, and check out Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. So that was Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore from 1974, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Ellen Burstyn and Chris Christopherson. Originally released by Warner Brothers. And at the time, this movie was kind of it came around at that time that there wasn't too many positive stories about women, and so Ellen Burstyn chose this script, and she was in the middle of one of the biggest hits of that time, the horror film classic The Exorcist. And this was also a Warner Brothers release, but they liked what they saw during the dailies of The Exorcist, that they gave Ellen Burstyn, a free control of what project she wanted to do, and so she found this script of Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, and even selected Martin Scorsese as the director. And so what came out of this was just a simple story about a single mom, actually a widowed woman, and her son. And this is a tough movie to kind of sit through. And I'm speaking that with 2026 vision, because this doesn't hold back. This movie this is a movie, definitely if it came out today, it would not receive the rating that it did. It would probably be more PG-13-ish, because what is depicted in this film is you have a woman who is... There's the depiction of women being treated in a certain way by men. I got to be careful with the words. That's why I paused there for a second. There's some men who are pigs and literally need to be dealt with, especially when it comes to the character played by Harvey Keitel. And even when Alice meets up with Chris Christopherson's character, yeah, I can't think of his name offhand, but he's just this rancher who shows up to the cafe. He's not a perfect individual. Matter of fact, he's very, very flawed, and you probably get the sense of why his wife left him, because he was probably a little too hard on the kids, and so yeah, that's kind of what is it's of course the story is about Alice, who's this woman. She's married, and she has a talent to be a singer. She's hoping to make it rich and famous being a singer, but she's got her son, Tommy, and her husband is killed in a traffic accident. And so she has to find a way to support her and her son, and it's not an easy way, and she tries to make it as a lounge singer, because there is somebody that does take her on as a lounge singer, but that's where Harvey Keitel's character comes in, and we find out he's married and he's fooling around with his wife, and he's very, very destructive in the relationship. So much so that Alice says, we're not gonna stay here. We need to leave. And so they do leave, and eventually they make their way to this little town, and she takes a job at the local cafe, and it's very, very, shall I say, redneck. You know, a lot of just locals that come in, and of course the people that own the cafe, they are very the woman is very, very, she has no filter, so she says everything that's kind of hillbilly-ish, and you know, like something that you would see in like country speak, and that's where it takes on the humorous tone. There's various characters that's in the cafe, and of course when this movie came out, it was very, very popular at the time. It had a sitcom spin-off. As a matter of fact, there was a few of the actors that made their way from the film to the TV show. One of them was Vic Tayback, who plays Mel, one of the owners of the cafe. However, the woman that played his wife, she's different. She was different at first, but then they switched it into, yeah, they did switch it like mid-season, but also the little boy that played Tommy was in the pilot episode of the TV show, but then was replaced. but also the young boy that played Tommy would go on to star in the movie The Bad News Bears as Ogilvy. So you had that going on, and as well as a young performance from a young Jodie Foster, who's kind of a troublemaker in this movie. She's that one friend that your parents warn you about, that you shouldn't be hanging around with. Yeah, that's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Of course, a film I always wanted to check out. Did check out. I do highly recommend it. It's definitely a story that it's down to earth. It's very much, I would say it's a blue collar movie. It's very blue collar because it's about, life doesn't always pan out the way you want it to. And that's okay. So, yeah, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. So, let's move on to the next one. Well, here we are. I figured I'm just going to go just a couple more movies, just a handful more, a couple more movies. Then I will close out this whole summer movie camp because it's been kind of a dreary one, to be honest with you. But I just thought, they just announced last year that they're doing a long-awaited sequel to tonight's film that we're going to show. So I figured, why not? Let's go back to 1987 and revisit the original. And of course, the original parody itself from MGM and Mel Brooks. It is Bill Pullman, Rick Moranis, John Candy, Daphne Zuniga. It is Spaceballs. Yes, we need to take a look at this 1987 comedy classic. Yeah, from directed by Mel Brooks, released by MGM. So we're going to turn things down. I need a good laugh this week. It's been a hard week at work, so I need to go back and revisit Spaceballs and just chill out. So here we go, from 1987, Spaceballs. So Spaceballs from 1987. I gotta say, this is definitely a funny movie. It's still, there's some jokes in it that don't hold up very well, but even that, it does have the jokes that would make it sort of relevant. I'll give you an example. There's a joke in which that goes into like what was popular at the time, which was video rental. Okay, so the joke is about instant cassettes. They're out in stores before the movie is finished, and they're using it as to advance the plot, where they go to a video, like a mock-up video store, pull out a VHS copy of Spaceballs, put it in the VCR, and fast forward to find out where the main characters are at. It's going to be interesting to see if they go to execute that joke in the new movie. They're definitely going to take a part in streaming because but that was the thing at the time. It was VHS cassettes and home video, and of course it's funny how things have happened. So, but some of the jokes, but like I said, it's a little dated. That joke can be a little dated, but it's still relevant enough because people people still watch movies they still rent or they still purchase movies, whether they stream it or whether they or whether it is a physical media. You know, there's no physical media rental, but like there's a lot of buy, sell, or trade places, and so it's interesting to see how that joke's going to play, but it's still relevant because we still watch movies, we still stream. There's people that are still going after VHS tapes. I don't get it, but I don't get that part because that definitely was an inferior format, but it's what we had at the time. But also, the film definitely, what it was meant to be was a straight up parody of science fiction. Mel Brooks at that time, he felt that it was the last thing that he could do. He felt like he had lampooned every genre of movie. He had gone from like, from Blazing Saddles, which was the Western. He'd gone to horror, which was Young Frankenstein. He even retreaded that with Dracula Dead and Loving It, but less said about that one, the better. But at the time, he felt like the science fiction fantasy film was kind of the last thing that he could go to make fun of and mock. But however, he was a little apprehensive at first because, this was George Lucas back then. And George Lucas back then was just as tight with Star Wars as he is to this day. I mean, obviously he sold Star Wars to Disney, but he's been very critical on what Disney has done with his former property. But at the time, Mel Brooks said the first thing he did as soon as the script was written, he just sent it off to George Lucas and called him up and said, "George, here's a script I've written. I want you to look at this. If there's anything that upsets you, that you don't find acceptable, I will not make this. I'll just throw this away." And so he's looking at, and George Lucas said, "It's funny." He said, "I've seen your other stuff. I've trusted, I've seen your other stuff, so I trust you. You're going to make something good out of this." And the only stipulation was that he could not sell any action figures or anything like that. Because, a big crucial moment in the film is they poke fun at merchandising. They poke fun at the merchandising of Star Wars, and because that's where the majority of Star Wars money was made. It wasn't, at the time, it wasn't necessarily the movies, it was the toys and it was the action figures. Because at the time, Lucas did not necessarily have 100% control over the movies. So he was making money off of the toys. The toys, the t-shirts, and all that stuff. And that would later change, but yeah, that was the one thing that Mel Brooks had. The big thing was, if there's anything that's going to be upsetting, and he was afraid. He was genuinely afraid of upsetting George Lucas. And I can understand it's that man's property. It's but George Lucas is like, "Mel, I've seen your other stuff. You're a funny guy. Go off and make this. Just don't sell toys." And there is no toys to be sold of Spaceballs. It's just, yeah. The movie became a cult hit over the years. It was not a huge box office success. It was profitable, but it was not a big box office success at the time. Um, and it was, I think, sometimes I think, we kind of go a little too far. Definitely Hollywood loves to exploit things like crazy. If one person makes a hit product, well, then there's like 15 other people that's got to capitalize on that. So, which also includes parody and lampooning. Yeah, you got a great comedic cast for the time. It was Bill Pullman's second movie. It was only his second movie. His first movie was Ruthless People. But also you have comedy veterans such as Rick Moranis, John Candy, who both came from Second City, and they were in their prime in terms of movie making and making comedy films. But also you have George Weiner. He had done a few films, but he was popular at the time on a TV show called Hill Street Blues. Daphne Zuniga, she had done some other films. She was just in the Rob Reiner film, The Sure Thing at the time. So she was kind of a young up and coming actress at the time, and of course, with this parodying Star Wars, Star Trek, well, definitely Star Wars, you needed a beautiful princess, and I think Daphne Zuniga fit that. Just wasn't afraid to be a little goofy. So yeah, and you have Joan Rivers as the voice of Dot Matrix, which was the C-3PO knockoff. Yeah, and and Dick Van Patten as the of King Roland, the king of the druids. Mel Brooks himself plays two characters, President Scroob and Yogurt, the Yoda parody. Of course, President Scroob is, except for the R, it's Brooks spelled backwards. But yeah, it's still a funny movie, and but also I will say this: it's not as funny as, let's say, Blazing Saddles. Blazing Saddles is really gut-punchingly funny. Spaceballs, you do have it's definitely funny, but it's not as, that rolling out of your chair laughter. And there's it does carry on with Blazing Saddles, where Brooks famously breaks through the fourth wall. There's moments of that in this film, like in the Schwartz battle with Lone Star and Dark Helmet. They accidentally go out of frame and cut down a sound booth operator. And yeah, cause that's kind of Mel Brooks's trademark, is to break the fourth wall a little bit. Or right at the first scene is where Colonel Sanders explains the whole plot of what the whole planet Spaceball's evil plan is to take the fresh air out of planet Druidia and transfer it over to planet Spaceball. And Rick Moranis turns towards camera and goes, "Everybody got that?" Again, fourth wall break. But yeah, do check out Spaceballs, the original, before you go see Spaceballs 2, which is due out sometime next year. So, another thing that was quite interesting about Spaceballs is that Brooks went to great lengths to make this look genuine, like it holds up within the Star Wars canon, because he was very, very meticulous with that, and so he went to the majority of the effects were done by the company Apogee, which was started by John Dykstra. Who is John Dykstra? Well, John Dykstra was the original visual effects supervisor for Star Wars. When there's a documentary on Disney Plus called Light and Magic, which is all about Industrial Light and Magic, the visual effects house. And it goes into a little bit of the deep story that Dykstra and Lucas kind of butted heads and was not hired back for any of the Star Wars sequels. And he very much wanted to be a part of that crew. So in the meantime, after Star Wars had ended, he starts his own visual effects company called Apogee, and the first thing they did was Star Trek the Motion Picture, right out of the gate. And but the supervisor was a man by the name of Peter Donnan, who supervised the effects on Spaceballs here. But ILM was involved in a couple key sequences in which the alien monster pops out of John Hurt, making fun of Alien. They built the alien puppet, and also the Schwartz battle sequence where it looks like the lightsabers with the rings and so on and so forth. So that was an ILM effects shot. So, but Brooks was like, we have to make this look like almost exactly like Star Wars. Like if you just took if you just looked at a piece of effects from Star Wars and you looked at a piece of effects from Spaceballs, it looks like it fits right in. And so the effects in this movie are really, really good for the time. But yeah, do check this out. Now this is the original 20th Century Fox MGM Blu-ray. I believe I forget who's put it out since. I can't remember if it's Kino Lorber. I think it's Kino Lorber that has done a more modern disc-based version of Spaceballs for Ultra 4K HD. So yeah, poke around Amazon, because Amazon owns all the MGM titles, and you know they've been pretty good about putting MGM stuff out on disc. So yeah, Spaceballs. So and eventually Spaceballs 2, the next one, coming to a theater near you. So one more comment about Spaceballs. Why didn't they call it Spaceballs 2: The Search for More Money? It was just a gag that's in the film. So yeah, let's go on to the next film. Well, here we are, the last feature of this year's summer movie camp. And I thought, what better way to close this with not only a childhood favorite of mine, but also a movie that's going to segue into the next video I'm wanting to do. So, what is this film? So, this is quite interesting because this came out in the summer of 1988. It was a huge hit, and it was kind of something that we had seen before in other movies, but not like this. And it was definitely a film that just was eye-popping and just like going, what are we looking at? It is from 1988, produced by Steven Spielberg, directed by Robert Zemeckis, released by Touchstone Pictures. It is the classic Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Yeah, based on the book Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary K. Wolfe, and was adapted onto the screen as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, starring Bob Hoskins, Joanna Cassidy, Christopher Lloyd. So, without further ado, let's dim the lights and take a look at this classic that's been a favorite of mine over the years, and I have some information about it and what just it's kind of got a lengthy story to it. So yeah, let's gather around and check out Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So that was Who Framed Roger Rabbit from 1988. And man, this movie, for the time, was an eye-popping experience because everybody is going, what in the world was that? How in the world did they do that? It's it's crazy to know what they were doing in the 1980s. They were always constantly trying to figure out new ways to do special effects, and particularly visual effects. And this was definitely a risk-taking movie. It was a very difficult movie to make. The story is based on a novel by Gary K. Wolfe titled Who Censored Roger Rabbit? And I've never read the book, but according to the research I've done, is that it's almost a completely different story. There's what they did for the movie was to make it palpable for a movie to work, because the character of Judge Doom, as I recall, does not even exist in the book. What does exist is doppelgangers instead of if you don't know what a doppelganger is, it's like a polar opposite of a good character. It's like the evil twin type situation. So like the book is centered around in an environment where human beings and cartoon characters coexist in the same world, and they interact with each other, and it does center around movie making and cartoon making and so on and so forth. So, but by the time here comes Steven Spielberg and Disney, they come together to make this movie. It was the first time that Spielberg and Disney had ever worked together on a project, and it wasn't until 10 years ago that Spielberg actually directed a Walt Disney Pictures release. So, but he produced several films in the late 80s, early 90s with Disney, with other directors in the chair. And Who Framed Roger Rabbit was the first of this. And Spielberg liked it so much, he said that he felt that it was a movie that Walt himself would have made had Walt Disney lived. And I think it would have been because Walt Disney himself had made movies over the span of his lifetime that combined live action and animation together, and so there's countless films where they use that, from Song of the South to Mary Poppins and So Dear to My Heart, and so on and so forth. There's just countless films where they did that. So, and Spielberg was heavily influenced by Walt Disney of the 40s and 50s himself, and so he thought, and also thought that Robert Zemeckis would be a fitting choice to direct this whole thing. And this was, like I said, this was a big movie, and However, Disney was very nervous about making this movie because how they were going to pull it off, no one knew. And also, you have to look at the time in which the types of movies that were being made. Animation was dead. The animated movie was dead. There was only a few films that were making any profit that were animation, but when it came to Disney animation, it was dead. And as a matter of fact, going into the production on Roger Rabbit, they made it clear, Spielberg made it very clear, and Zemeckis made it very clear that Walt Disney Feature Animation was not to work on this movie. Think about that. Because they were afraid if Walt Disney Feature Animation had made this movie, it would have hurt it. It would have tanked it. Instead, they hired legendary animation director Richard Williams, who had done films such as the Raggedy Ann and Andy movie. He had also directed the animation on the Pink Panther movies. So this was a guy who kind of knew how to do that sort of thing, and plus Richard Williams had a unique sense of animation and this was all by hand, by creating, he had a unique way of doing three-dimensional animation and backgrounds and so on and so forth, how to stretch things and manipulate things all by using drawings. And no computers were used in this movie whatsoever. This was 100% analog movie. So here's what kind of how it worked. Zemeckis and Spielberg, they went to Elstree Studios in England to shoot the bulk of the movie, and they shot all the live action material first. And of course, every shot is storyboarded, carefully storyboarded. They go off and shoot the movie without any cartoon characters, shoot all the live action, and then they would they would edit the film all together, sent the film to ILM, where they printed off individual frames where the cartoons were to be put in. Sent that to the animation studio, and then the animation footage would be sent back to ILM to be put on top of the live action. So it was a process that took 2.5 years to make. Very expensive, and what do you know, it ended up being a huge hit in 1988. And still to this day, people want to know, where's the sequel to Roger Rabbit? Well, that is tied up between Spielberg and Disney, as well as the author of the book. Gary K. Wolfe apparently had something to do with how the rights, I think they let time lapse so long as that Disney has lost the rights to the original story. And so, and I don't think Disney or Amblin Entertainment want to continue making any further Roger Rabbit cartoons. And Disney has tried to persuade Spielberg, hey, let's do something with Roger Rabbit over the past 30 to almost 40 years. Actually 38 years, ever since the movie came out. And the only thing that they really managed to do was 3 animated shorts that were attached to other movies. And this is where the story kind of gets a little complicated. In 1989, Disney releases a movie called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And attached to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was the first of the Roger Rabbit theatrical shorts. And that would be a little cartoon, 8-minute cartoon titled Tummy Trouble, in which the cartoon is simple as that Baby Herman swallows a rattle. The second cartoon appeared in 1990. It was attached to Dick Tracy. Now, this is where things get complicated between Disney and Spielberg. Because the second film that Spielberg and Disney were collaborating on was a film called Arachnophobia. And it was the first film released under the Hollywood Pictures banner. Spielberg wanted the second Roger Rabbit cartoon entitled Roller Coaster Rabbit to be attached to Arachnophobia. Well, Disney and Michael Eisner did not feel the same way. Instead, they attached it to Dick Tracy. And in which Spielberg was not very happy about. And the third was attached to a film called A Far Off Place, which came out in 1993, I believe, under the Walt Disney Pictures banner. And it's a film that takes place in Africa, stars a young Reese Witherspoon in the title. But this movie is a fun movie. It still holds up a little bit. Where over the years I can see why Disney chose to make it a touchstone release, because there were several not so kid-friendly things in this movie, even though it was animated. There's some innuendo jokes and things like that that are very dominant in this movie. As a matter of fact, at the time, they stirred up a little controversy with that, and they had a few of the toons say some swear words too. But yeah, but this is one I watched when I was a kid. But the other thing, the reason why I want to close this video out with Who Framed Roger Rabbit was, this was 3 elaborate movies in one. It was a full-length animated film, a full-length special effects movie, and a full-length live-action film noir tribute movie. So the film takes place in 1947, late 1940s. And you think about the story, it's very film noirish. And so we'll get into that in the next video, because we're going to go to film's dark side with film noir. So, from me to you, keep watching the movies and Hope you have a good school year, work year, whatever it is. But from me to you, see you later.